So I thought I'd give you a brief tour of what our classes look like in Canvas, because it'll take a few weeks for you to get your own Canvas account. So this is a lecture course, and we want them all to look pretty much the same as far as these tabs go, so that students navigating through the courses don't have too much trouble finding things. So you'll see that the lab course I'll show you will look pretty much the same. So this is a home page, and for every assignment that you populate with a date, it'll have this master list for the students that shows them what the assignments are. And then most of the time for lecture, they're going to go to modules or to Zoom. And Zoom is where you would set up the links for your classes. And since this one's done, I'll show you. Right, these are the links. They were recorded so that students can go back and look at them. I won't show you grades because I'm a test student in this case. So this instructor built his course in these sections are called modules. So he built it as a series of modules, not a week by week format. But if you want to do week by week, that's totally okay. So he put all of the lectures lecture exams in one module. These are released for 48 hours, and that's on the syllabus. It says it's going to be open from, say, 12 p.m. on a Tuesday to 12 p.m. on a Thursday, so that students have a 48-hour window to take the course. Both lecture and lab will use Respondus, which is an anti-cheating software webcam kind of thing. It also prevents them from using internet windows because they're taking the exams online, usually at home. Some do it in our library. So every class that's using it, they have this practice quiz, and what's in there is entirely up to you. I'll certainly share what I do in mine. And that's to make sure that they can download the software, that they can use it, and there's nothing glitchy, and that they've had some experience using it before a high stakes assessment like a lecture exam or a lab practical. And then, he has the homework assignments in a different module, and then the notes and the topic concentration guides, which are these study guides. I mean, that every question on a test, with rare exception, can be mapped to these study guides. Some students say they're too long. There's a lot of content in the class. They're very specific, which is why they might seem long. So I tell students, if they ask me how to study, use the topic concentration guides and use the objectives in the lab manuals. If you don't, then you may be missing some content that you should know. And we know that we can't teach every single little thing in the study guide. So some of that, they may be doing some independent learning on, which is perfectly okay. So that's what that looks like, and these are his notes. So now I'll show you my lab class. So this is my lab class from the spring, and this is the student view. So the homepage has announcements. I sent them stuff like drop-in tutoring, and just some stuff about lab assignments, or after I graded a test, I said it's done. Now you can go look at it. So with both the lecture exams and the lab practicals, mostly with the lab practicals, I read through every single answer on every student's test. There's a lot of self-grading aspects, but that way I can double check, like in case they misspelled something or they had an alternate answer that was fine, but I just didn't have it in the bank of reasonable answers, they can still get credit for that. And in the lab course, I rarely used Zoom with the exception of a week or two when every student was doing online lab work. So most of the time they were going here. So this is what mine looks like. There's a start here some important information about the college. This module will change a little bit because all of this, with the exception of these two documents, are actually in the lab manual now. They're not separate items from the lab manual. And then I did a week by week structure. So I built this Canvas course, and then every lab instructor just copied my course, both for A&P 1 and 2, because I had set all the dates. I'd done all the icky grunt work that's not super fun to do, and then, matched it to the syllabus. So you can see as well there's the Respondus quiz that everybody had to do. And I told the students, right, if you were in Group A and I assigned them to either Group A or Group B, it was pretty much alphabetical. First 8 in Group A, second 8 in Group B, unless they really needed to switch. So I told Group A, you're coming to lab on campus this week. Group B, you are working online. So for this first week, Group A came to the lab and did the microscopy lab. Group B did this lab that is on anatomical terminology. So there is a lab quiz, lab assignment embedded in this page. So this page gives them like a summary. The objectives for every lab are the study guide. And then I gave them a bunch of things to do to work through the lab material. And lastly, the part that counts for the grade is this lab assignment. And all of them, with maybe one exception, are you can do it as many times as you want and will retain your highest grade. For the lecture class I just showed you, students had like 2 chances to do the homework to get the highest grade that they can. And most students were generally, if they're taking time to work through the homework as they should, generally they're going to have somewhere in an A average for homework for the most part. So the way that I built the lab quizzes was that the students had to score an 80% or better, which is, fairly standard in healthcare, and most of the students are going into healthcare. When you do professional development, 80% or higher gets you full credit. So that's what we did. But we also tell students aim for 100%, right? Because then you actually know the material. So this is just my student attempt, so you can kind of see what it does. So if I was this student, I would go back and take the quiz again. This particular one does not have anything for the students to upload, but I'll show you an example of one that does. So for lab 4, exercise 4, this was about cells. The students needed to do a part of the lab using materials in their lab kit. It's just making taking pipe cleaners and making stages of mitosis. So when they went into the lab quiz and tried to make it fun, like take a selfie of you and your mitosis, and some of them really got into it. Some were just, here's my picture. I've also beefed that up a little bit for this coming academic year, so that when they are doing online labs or at-home labs, they have to show evidence of having done the entire lab, not just 1 or 2 parts of it. So here's an example of one of the questions where the student has to upload a picture. Again, for this coming year, I've made the directions much clearer, much more specific. This one was only worth 5 points because it was early. The ones where, and they only did one little part of the lab hands-on. Other labs where they're doing an entire lab at home, these kind of questions are worth a lot of points, so that if they don't do them, they won't reach that 80% benchmark, which is fine for one lab, But if they do that for more than one, then it really starts to take a toll on their grade. And I mean, these are kind of easy points to get. Just do the lab and show the evidence of it. What else can I show? Oh, I'll show you one more thing, which is a practical. And I'll let you in on a not so secret. So these questions that are in the weekly lab quizzes, or the questions like the post-lab questions that students do when they're in the lab or in the lab activities, those questions are very similar, if not verbatim, in the lab practicals. So I can tell you this exact picture shows up in the lab practicals. I don't tell students that. I say, you know, it might look pretty familiar, but the astute students who use the resources wisely figure it out pretty fast. So when students go to take a lab practical or a lecture exam, they're going to see this kind of information. They'll know, again, that it's closed note, closed book. There's one exception, I think on this practical, that we let them use a piece of paper because there's calculations on it. And so they read through this as a reminder, and then when they go to the practical, which they'll have like a much shortened version of that, and to really see it, you'd have to have responded. So I'm going to get out of the student view just to show you a couple. So this is the instructor view. This is not the student view anymore. And you can see that there's pools of questions. They're not huge pools, but they're pools of questions. And every student gets X number of questions from each of these pools. And I would suggest that you take the time before you start teaching, for at the beginning, and then a couple weeks in, and then a few more weeks in, that you take the time to read through the pools, both for the lecture and the lab exams. Certainly not so that you can teach to the test, but so that you have an idea of the depth and the breadth that students are expected to know, and how the questions are kind of, formulated and asked, so that, you can help them kind of think about, how might you answer a question about this, or how do you think, this kind of thing would work. For the lecture exams, I happen to know the test so well that I pretty much know a lot of the questions verbatim. So if you go into the short answer and long answer question banks for the lecture exams, if you pull out a couple of pieces, maybe like a part of a question here or a part of a question there, I don't have any problem with you using that as a sample with students to say, let's work through this kind of question that might be like a test question, so that they can start to learn how to write and process and think scientifically and with detail, and how much detail is essential. I can also let you read some exemplar answers and some, lesser answers from past students anonymously, of course.